All right, folks, welcome to the fully remote talk show. We are talking to Florian today on episode 16 of the talk show that is targeted at leaders adapting their style to a fully remote world. We're talking today about running a successful virtual meeting. Again, we've talked about this topic on and off in many different episodes, but today we're going to get like a little bit more tactical, more about the direct tips that we can take away on running a good, successful virtual meeting. And we all kind of know what is sort of the cost of running a bad meeting, and especially around how, like not just like the cost of bringing everybody and the time spent on this, but like how much this affects the employee morale and all of these things. So we will like talk about that, and I'm interested in like knowing everybody's opinion about that. But one thing that we also like notice is that like as a moderator, as a person who's running a meeting, there is a significant responsibility. And depending on the type of the meeting, you're sometimes driving outcomes, you're trying to foster connections, or you're trying to like bring about like strengthening the teamwork. You are responsible for all of this, and it's not easy. And for the most part, many people do a bad job of it, and which has led everybody to sort of hate meetings as a whole. And there is many ways that we can fix this in the real world as well as virtual meeting. But what can we do in a virtual meeting, in a remote first setup, and how can we change the meeting culture over here? We're excited to talk about this today, and we have among us Florian. Again, welcome again, Florian, to the show.
Thank you so much.
Florian was here a couple of weeks back, and he is an author. He's written a book about running better meetings. We literally have a link to that on the page over here. In case if you're curious, you can just click on that and go and like take a look at it. You can always click on the LinkedIn to follow Florian or connect with him as well. Welcome again to the show, Florian.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
Awesome. So as we usually do, we just do like a real quick way to like connect with our audience over here. And we do that in the form of like doing a quick one word or a phrase pulse check with everybody here. If you could change one thing about the world, what would you change? That's your prompt. And like think about like one thing that you would want to change and type that phrase over here. The idea here is to get you more in the interactive mode. This is Zinc is an interactive meeting platform where we encourage everybody to not just be watching a video, but be more participatory, be part of the contributor list over here. So go ahead and type. I know what I'm going to type. I'll give like 10 seconds for everybody to type, and then let's see the answer. No more wars, peace, kindness, religion, stricter gun control. Looks like we are all on the same theme of like war and religions. That's interesting. Yeah, is kindness versus wars. I see a lot of theme over here. This is great. I'm glad that you're all here with a mission. And today we are discussing about meetings, which is inherently about how people connect. And so hope we bring some of that enthusiasm to this meeting as well. Jumping in, I'm gonna like directly jump to this the interview portion of this meeting. Take it from where we left last time. I think like we were talking about like purposeful meetings, and we were talking about like it's like, hey, what does it take to run a purposeful meeting? Let's just go back to that question. Maybe Florian, just give us an idea of like, what is a purposeful meeting, and like, what is a good way to set the right purpose for your meeting?
So a purposeful meeting, it sounds funny, but it's a meeting where we are clear what the purpose is. And often I think that's when I talk to different companies, and when I get the experience, that people often get invited to meetings or sit in meetings where they feel for a longer time like I'm not really sure what we're trying to do here, or what we're trying to achieve here, or why am I in this meeting. So as simple as it is, a purposeful meeting is first of all, also from the person who set it up or invited the meeting, is very, very clear on what is my purpose, or what are my purposes, basically. I think I mentioned also last time. I mean, there are different ways of how to look at it. So I introduced one framework that I call like the meeting framework, that looks basically at 4 main purposes that you could have, and you could of course mix and match them then for a meeting. But you could think about it when you think about more in terms of what kind of output that we want to have at the end. And you just also, Arjun, you just mentioned this. So for example, one could be it's improving collaboration or fostering the team cohesion, for example. So right, that could be one purpose. It's more like a group, improving group dynamics and trust, for example. So that is one purpose. Another one could be very like operational, where it's about synchronizing information, soliciting information, defining next steps. A third one that I look at is to say a purpose is to make decisions about something, or to create proposals in order to make decisions and agreements on something. And finally, you could have something like, which is around learning and improvement. So these are like 4 very general purposes. And I think what benefits the meeting most is to be very clear in before you actually plan for it. Like, so what is my purpose, or do I have one or even 2 of them, and then think about, and how do I have to go about it in order to achieve that purpose.
This is great. I mean, I think I love this, and I wanted to even though this is something that we discussed before, I wanted to start over here because I want to ask a more sort of tactical or practical question, right? Like I have probably run several meetings over here internally, as well as many meetings externally as well. And I actually always struggle. It's almost sort of that blank slate as to you have to type a purpose, and it helps to have some categories and using them as there. But what are some practical ways, when you define this purpose? Is this something that you send it out as an email saying that this meeting is about this? Is this something that goes in the title of your meeting? Or is this something that once people have come in is the first thing that you do? And or more than one way of this? And what is sort of the practical advice over here to make sure that everybody is aligned on the purpose?
So ideally, yes, I would advise you depending on what system you use and how much information you can provide, but normally you can have like a title, and then you can add a bit of stuff below of what's going to happening. And then I would actually really recommend also for the person who invites to the meeting to force him or herself to write it out what it is. So let's say, okay, this meeting we will talk about the new CRM tool we are planning to use, and the purpose of this meeting will be to get a common understanding about the different options that are available for us, and at the end make a decision which one we want to use in the future, right? And so you would be very clear about, in this case, we would have 2 purposes. So the final one is, okay, let's make a decision which one we're going to use, but the other one is to get a common understanding about what options we actually have, and then make a decision. So that would be very explicit to basically phrase, this is what this meeting is for. And for example, if it's not for making a decision because you feel like that can't be done within that same session, then the purpose would just be to get a common understanding about the different options and the implications of choosing one option over the other, in order to inform a decision that will then be made later. But then again, we would be very clear about, okay, this is about exchanging information, getting a bigger picture, but there will no decision be made in that meeting, for example.
Got it. Okay. This is great. So if you can put the purpose right in the meeting invitation, just have it as a subtitle or a subtext into your description, or a description to your meeting. Make that very obvious over here. And then sort of going to one of the other ones which you mentioned really, which got us very excited last time, is about these participation rules, or what is sort of the artful participation, how people should behave in this meeting. What is some good guidelines of how to frame that? What should go in that? Is it very practical things like keep your microphones muted, or is it a little bit more wider than that? What exactly goes into that artful participation? Again, how do you communicate that to your audience?
Yes. So that artful participation, which I mentioned last time, is actually really just that one sentence, and it's very generic and leaves a bit of space for interpretation. More like this is a general reminder that will never be wrong in whatever kind of setting you are in. It basically says, so it's asking yourself the question: is my behavior at this moment in this meeting the greatest contribution that I can make to the effectiveness of the collaboration, right? So that's so here the assumption is this is always a useful question to ask, and it's just sometimes as we get so caught up in the content. So it could be, for example, on the back of your canvas, it could come up every once in a while, and just like a reminder, okay, hey, let me just be conscious about this. And then, however, you could have, so I called
What's
them
what's a practical example of that? Sorry to interrupt, but like,
yeah.
I like that. But what if you can give like a couple of practical examples of that that one liner? What would it be?
That could be, for example, so you put it on there, and what it could mean specifically is that when I, for example, listen to something where I really feel this would not go into a good direction for us, then I would very artfully bring it up, knowing that maybe some people might not be happy hearing it or hearing me bringing up where I see the difficulty lies in that. So, for example, that I'm very artful in not just going over it and say, well, I know it's not going to work, but I don't, for the sake of harmony, I will not say anything. And at the end, when things go wrong, then I say, well, I knew that before. That would not be artful, because that's not the greatest contribution I can make. And sometimes, right? Sometimes it could be, and I see that a lot. And maybe you told me you worked in Microsoft before, so I see that a lot in corporate settings. That sometimes you have people in a meeting, because it's kind of the culture, that people want to say something just for the sake of having said something, so that they gain some visibility in the meeting, and they're just gonna go with some empty bullshit phrase that they had said something. And in terms of artful participation, it would be, okay, if I don't have anything at this moment that I can contribute, I will not just reiterate something that somebody else said just so that I have spoken. Right? So that would also not be very artful. But of course, it hopefully then leads to a certain culture where we don't necessarily think that who talks the most and who is the loudest is basically is the best participant in a meeting. Right? But it could be that you have somebody who is very quiet, but it only says at one point very artfully and very consciously says one thing that is of a lot of value. Then we would appreciate that, and not, well, you only said one thing, and I counted how many things you said, and you only said one. So sorry, right? So that's an example of what that could mean.
Got it. I think that makes sense. I think I might have like sort of mixed the idea that you mentioned about artful participation with the other concept that you mentioned around like making rules of the meeting a bit more explicit, in the sense that like if you're coming from very many different cultures, people don't have the right idea of how to like behave in a meeting, and so you could make the rules of the meeting explicit. What's some good examples of these kind of rules, and like how would you convey this to audience? Is this again something that you send this as a pre-read in an email, or like is this something that you would first and foremost as you welcome people just put this in the meeting?
Again, I think that depends a bit on the context. So normally so I would call that pop-up rules, so things that are maybe only just popping up, and they're valid for the context of our meeting. So if it's a group that works together on a regular basis, I mean, you might do that a few times at the beginning of some meetings, and then at some point you would assume, okay, everybody knows it, right? And then we don't have to emphasize them again. But especially if you have, and I think in virtual meetings that's even more important. If you have a group that has not been working that often together, then you might be very explicit and say, okay, if it's very basic, but I still see it. Like, okay, if you want to say something, raise your hand, right? Just so that we avoid talking over each other. For example, another thing is that but when I facilitate, for example, I often have a specific way of how we make decisions. I'm using a specific process for that. And I would outline, for example, that we would first have the person introduce what the proposal is. Then we're going to ask questions of understanding. And then we're going to listen to a round of reactions. Okay. And then we talk about what's the decision. And so, for example, I would just say, okay, guys, this is the way we want to do it. So that means when the proposal is there, let the person finish introducing the proposal without starting bombarding him or her with questions. And when you have a question, it's not the same as a reaction. And for example, these kind of things that you would make it explicit. Or in some settings, it's like, okay, are we documenting things where and how is that being done? So these whatever you think is helpful and maybe is something that didn't work recently or in the past, and whatever that is, you make it explicit because you think it's going to be beneficial for your specific meeting purpose.
Makes a ton of sense. So when you practically speaking, the first thing, depending on like how many times you met with the same group or so, you may have pop-up roles that you want to surface. Do that in the first part of your meeting. Try to get those pop-up roles out of the way.
Yeah.
Love it. I have a lot of other more practical questions for you, but I'm going to do a quick activity with the group over here. And again, like, you know, this is something that makes this fun. Here, I want to basically like get some bad meeting experience vibes over here. Again, like we probably have thought about this, especially I'm looking for like some stories. Like, so if anybody has any bad meeting experience story, please like raise your hands and share this, or feel free to like type this over here. Overall, like I think the part that I'm actually curious to know is like how many ways in which a meeting can pretty much go bad, right? Like there is just so many ways in which we can go bad. So I'm like trying to collect as much of that as possible over here. So please share your story over here. But Florian, I'm curious to know, maybe you can get this started to say like, what is sort of some of the worst offenses that you've heard of and that you can actually like share, whether it's a story that personally happened to you or something that you've heard from your clients?
I was just starting to type in here. I mean, it's I heard and I've seen it once, I think, that there are people who try to be and it's doable in theory in the virtual world. They are trying to be in more than one meeting at the same time because they get overbooked and their calendar gets overbooked and they are just logging into 2 or 3 meetings at the same time. And it results into they are not being present in any of them, but their name appears on all 3 of them. And it's partly, of course, I mean, you could say what a poor person in the sense of he's getting so many requests and he can't push them out. But of course, also, I think it's partly our responsibility then as a choice to say, hey, I'm only one person and I can only be in one meeting at a time. So I'll deliberately choose which one I'm going to be in, but I'm not trying to be in all 3 of them. And of course, at some point, people would notice because they would ask him and it would take a few seconds. And what did you say? And then at some point, he realized, hey, I'm also trying to answer. He was talking, but you couldn't hear him. And then you realized, hey, he was in another meeting as well.
Wow.
So one example.
Wow, that's a pretty extreme multitasking stuff. Let's see, I have Jay up over here. Jay, what is a bad meeting experience that you've seen?
Yeah, so just to it falls under the category of meeting without an agenda, but it's a very specific instance of it where so we have these like typically in engineering organizations you have the concept of design review meetings where someone comes in and proposes a design of a solution, and then you review it with your peers, and then you have feedback, and then they go address feedback, or you kind of like approve the design and you move forward with implementation. So one such bad design review meeting is where I think it's actually ended up being a brainstorming meeting, but it was called as a design review, so we all waited for a design, but then the person shows up and pitches the problem and then like stares at all of us, right? And essentially it ends up being like an all-out, like everyone's pitching their ideas. Is a total waste of 1 hour where it just ended up being like a massive unstructured brainstorming solution where nothing came out of it because there was no design and nothing was done, and we just ended up like talking over each other, and ended up being like a colossal waste of time.
Love it. I think I love the story, and I think it just sort of dovetails really well with what we just said. Is like that's the kind of meeting that didn't have a clear purpose. We like nobody had any idea of why they came to that meeting, and like goes down the drain when that thing happens. Thanks for sharing that, Jay. Any other? We can like probably do one more story, and then like go back to like asking Florian questions. Anyone has any other story here? I see the classic stream roller couldn't get a word in all the meeting, and including the speaker retained any of it. I love that. Yeah. It does not show up to the meetings without agenda. I think this is great. I feel like if you have any other stories that come up to you, feel free to raise your hand and then come back to this. But I'm going to go back to this question mode right now. So again, going back to more tactical things, who should get invited to a meeting, and how do you like sort of get away from this mode that like, oh, let's just more the merrier, let's include as many people as possible, we are an inclusive culture, and how do you actually get away from that? What is sort of the practical advice to say like who gets invited to a meeting?
Again, I feel that depends very much on the purpose, what the purpose of the meeting is, right? So, I mean, there could be things like a specific type where it's about improvement and learning, and maybe somebody wants to share something, and people then can see if it's useful for their work and can ask questions. I mean, this could be a case where you might argue, well, the more the merrier. It's fine because I'm just sharing it, and then if people derive value out of it, then come, feel free to join. But then there are other sessions where we would mostly go about and say, so who is really relevant for that? When it's, for example, about synchronizing information about a project, then we would ask, okay, who is involved in that? So with whom would we have to synchronize? So who is relevant? Or another aspect could be, okay, who is necessary when it comes to, okay, we have to make a decision. Whom do we need to make that decision, or which perspective would we need to hear? So again, it would very much come from the purpose. Okay, if the purpose is making a decision, so what person do we need to, and what person would we benefit from? And I think one reason why often there are so many people in or get invited to is it actually doesn't have anything to do with the meeting itself, but there is often in organizations. So sometimes it's for political reasons, because we want to say, okay, we want to include people so that nobody can say I wasn't part of this. That's one, and of course that's sometimes is a bigger change that needs to happen in the organization to go around that. And sometimes it's a symptom of things not being clear in terms of responsibilities. And because you don't know who's responsible for something, you just invite anybody you think could possibly have a connection to that topic. So then it's more a symptom of a lot of things are unclear, and so we just invite as many people as we can just to ensure that hopefully we cover some person who will be able to do something with it. That's actually not uncommon, and sometimes then reflects in the meeting.
Right. No, it's actually a good point. The political reasons is sometimes what I've seen why we keep it very open, like so that like people don't feel like they're left out, and like there is not like a like things around that, as well as like sometimes it's pure laziness from the organizer. There is like this big group alias that exists for like everybody. It's just easy for me to just add everybody over there, and it's like one shot I'm done with that part of it. And I've noticed that like especially when bigger corporations, it's just so much easier to just invite team as a whole rather than trying to pick who's going to be relevant. Good points over there. I have 3 or 4 more questions, so maybe we could just go rapid fire on these ones as well. Like it's like I've heard a lot about like the opening of the meeting, or like the first 5 minutes of the meeting is sort of very relevant in like setting the right, not just the rules and everything, not the logistics side of things, but more like the mood and the tone and like that of the meeting. What are some good opening like how do you open the meeting well?
Again, it depends on what the setting is.
Of course,
I mean,
yeah.
one is what I sometimes like to do is to actually do a check-in with people. So a check-in is a specific format where you would ask like one question that could be relevant, and everybody, depending on, of course, the length of the meeting and how many people we have, but everybody would be able to say something about that. But it's really very shortly. But for example, what's some good news, or what's something that you're really looking forward for today. So have a check-in to give people a space to actually go into the meeting. Otherwise, I mean, sometimes just basic things. I've just had this yesterday. I was invited to a meeting, and as soon as people showed up, they would just dive right into the content. And I felt, hey, it would have been nice just to say, okay, thanks everybody for being here. This is again why we are here, and this is currently what we think about how we're going to do things. So to give people a bit of a sense for, okay, here's the purpose, that, but here's the agenda. This is the approach of what I want to do. Are we good to go? And then I would go in with the first question, or whatever it is. But maybe having some kind of opening in the first place. And that sounds strange, but I really do see that often, that as soon as people pop up, they, all right, everybody's here. Okay, topic one, and just going right in, and it sometimes just feels a bit too rushed and too fast into the topic.
Got it. Okay. So a good opening that is a little bit more inviting, making sure everybody gets that, and like reiterating the purpose and setting the stage for that is a good idea. Yeah. And since we're talking about opening as well, right? Like I see like some closing as well being too abrupt, and I'm guilty of this a lot more times than the opening, is like don't know how to close a meeting, and we're like almost in this abrupt phase where like, okay, we're out of time, let's just be done kind of mode. And I'm kind of curious about like what are some good ways to close a meeting, especially in the virtual setting where it's like there's no like sort of lagging, I mean like sort of going out of the room and like chatting outside that exists. You're now like when you're done, you're like closing the window and you're done. So what is sort of good ways to close a meeting?
So one, what we like to do, and again, it's a bit of, you have to nurture a culture, but we often start with a check-in, and we would also leave, if it's not like a 15-minute like stand-up where we wouldn't do it, but otherwise we would do like a check-out as well, so that basically everybody has again the opportunity to say in what mood, in what state, with what sentiment am I leaving the meeting, right? And then this could be something like, okay, I think today was really productive, and we got this topic cleared, which was on my head for a long time. So I really feel relieved now that we're done with it. Or it could be something a bit more thoughtful and say, I felt I'm kind of okay, but I felt we had a few times where we were just talking over each other, and I feel like that's something I would hope we could do different next time. So it can also be constructive, but just having a personal space where you don't have to justify or explain anything, but you have a chance to also check out, right? That could be one. Or you would, as you just said, because that's really one thing that with virtual sometimes is lacking a bit, is we don't really have that time then to chat any further. So we could actually deliberately plan that in and say, hey, we have the last 7-8 minutes where we can just chat with each other, and there is no structure, nothing, and we can just talk to each other, because that's like a key insight I got, like what happens in person on site, these things that like kind of just happen, you have to make them happen in a virtual setting, because they do not just happen normally, right? If you don't plan for a time for people just to chat, because you don't bump into each other, otherwise you won't. So I think in the virtual setting, you might have to be very deliberate about it. And that could also be a great ending then, that you can just talk about whatever for the last minutes.
Nice.
So that could be a nice ending. The only thing to be aware of here is it shouldn't be a buffer that you can always eat up in case you run overtime, right? So you should really make this as something that should happen, and we want this to happen.
Love it. I think those are like very practical ways. A clear checkout, or almost build in the whole like hallway moment or a water cooler moment into your meeting, and fix a specific time so it's in your agenda and it's not something that like you like forget about it. Which also brings to my like sort of next question, right? Like managing time and like specifically about because as an organizer, like it's like you have agenda, like strictly running through this, but there's always sort of push and pull. There's like the person who's like talking constantly and not yielding and like not letting the agenda go. And what is some tactful ways for a person, especially in the virtual meeting setting, you have a little bit more controls on some of these things. What are some practical ways that somebody can like manage this well as a facilitator or like the timekeeper?
So you say like that people would just keep talking and talking, right? And it would kind of ruin whatever you planned. Is that the question?
It could be one of that, like where like people are talking about something, or like the meeting is actually like naturally taken much more heated discussion about some topic, which may not be a bad thing at all, but your timing is just going out of whack right now.
Yeah.
You planned for 5 minutes, but this has gone for like 15 minutes now. So how do you handle those?
A few things that came to me over time. So one is, of course, the more often this happens, the better you will be able to learn from it and kind of estimate or assess upfront how much things realistically will take. And I think what would be interesting is then to really listen to that knowledge that you have, because I also see that there is a lot of, I call it over optimistic planning happening, in the sense of we know that we will not get 8 topics made a decision on in 1 hour, but we still again plan for 8 topics to make a decision on. It's just unrealistic. So either plan for more time right away, or just put less stuff in. That would be one. Have a bit of a buffer that we would also deliberately plan in, and maybe have a backup. So if you're done faster, which could happen, either here's another topic I wanted to talk about anyway, or we're done earlier, which is nice.
Right.
And the other way, when things take longer, so what I like to do is using a time box to say this is how much time we allocated for this. Now, when we run into the last minute of that time box, then I would say, okay, hey, here it seems like we will not make it in the time box, and then we include the participants and say, okay, now we have a few options. Would you want to extend the time box, knowing that we will have to deprioritize something else, but what we want deliberately make that decision to extend it and to not discuss something else we have on the agenda? Or can we, within the next minute, define one specific next step that needs to happen with that specific topic, and then we move on to the next agenda item that we have scheduled for? I think the only thing that shouldn't happen is just that you run into the end of your time box and you just keep talking, and as if nothing happened. Right. And I see that a lot. You say, oh yeah, well, time's up, just keep going. But be very deliberate and say, okay, time's up. What do we do? Keep going, drop something else, or take 1 minute to make a next step and move on. I think that would be the best advice, but be conscious about it. Don't be dictatorial about that time box. It's just an indication, but be conscious when it's over what it is that you want to do. And then I think everybody then is fine to say, okay, yeah, let's just discuss one topic less than we planned, but finish this one, and it's a conscious decision. Or just, okay, stop here now, make a next step and move on.
I love it. And I'm kind of cringing a little bit because I'm so guilty of this all the time, where I just let time run out and then like just continue as if nothing happened. Kind of like what I'm doing right now, where we set this for like about 30 minutes and we're doing this. So I'll be very mindful of this. And like, use this opportunity to kind of like wrap this up over here. I did have a couple of other questions that I wanted to ask, but this has been amazing because these are like very, very practical advice that we can take over here and, like come back to over here. And I want to thank everybody who showed up today, obviously. And like, please go ahead and like type what was your top takeaway. And I think there were many for me this time. Type that over there. And Florian, appreciate you again coming up in our show and giving us these like sort of golden nuggets of information and as well as practical takeaways over here. Thank you again.
Thank you very much for having me. It was very nice. Thank you.
Awesome, folks. Yeah, again, as we just discussed, maybe we actually keep the floor open. And if you folks who want to hang out, just hang out and we can just talk informally over here on like anything that came up in the show or anything else as well. But otherwise, you can take it easy and check out, and we will see you next week.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much, Florian. Yeah.
And it's evening for you now, right? For most people, I think, that are joining, you're all in the same.
It is. It's 5:40 p.m. my time.
There we go. Is everybody apart from me in the same time zone? Is it 5:40 for all of you?
Nope.
No.
So I'm 1 hour. I'm at 6:40. If you have like, and for Kevin's like 8:40, I think.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, for me it's 6:40 as well.
Here we go.
I see. There you go.
What time is it over there, Florian?
It's 8:40 a.m.
A.m.
Yes, yeah. So for me, the day starts, and I'm already on Friday. So you are on Thursday.
You're almost on the weekend.
yeah. As I said, there was a public holiday yesterday for most of my clients, and so it's gonna be it's good. So it's a more quiet day today, and I can get some stuff done that I didn't get to do during the week. So yeah, that's nice.
Awesome.
All right.
All right, folks. This is some good takeaways over here.
No, I was to say, have a good evening, everybody, and hope to see you at some other occasion again. So we'll be in touch for sure.
Yes, for sure. Yes. Thanks, Florian. Have a great one.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right.
Cool.
Yeah. Awesome. Good